So the one we were looking at before was really more of a newer home that probably has less issues. What do we look for in an older home? And some people get really scared of investing or buying older homes when in fact they might be built even better than some of the new homes. And so what should we be concerned about in these older homes, and what would be a red flag?
Typically, the older homes, the technology wasn't, some things they over-engineered. Like I've seen some foundations that are better than, put together better than anything today. They over-engineered the concrete, so it's going to last forever. But some of the other technologies aren't quite as new, such as knob and tube wiring. And that's not a red flag per se, because, that knob and tube wiring is still in functional working order. It's not grounded, and it's a little bit more dangerous because you do have some exposed wires and connections where you got to kind of watch out for. Insurance companies get a little jumpy sometimes when they know a house has knob and tube, but as long as they know about it, and and you can say it on your insurance form, and it's usually not ever an issue. So, and then of course some people have upgraded the wiring where there's some two-prong outlets that aren't grounded with some three-prong outlets that are grounded. As you can see, that bottom middle picture where it looks like somebody has put in some new wiring, but again, they forgot the simple task of putting on a cover over the junction box to make it a little safer. And then the right hand one is just an outlet that that's installed, but they in the haste maybe forgot to put the cover on it. So things like that are just small items, but not necessarily a red flag, especially with the knob and tube. It's kind of typical on older homes. Again, what I look for here is the one I called out. That service line entry point is a potential for two reasons. One, you can see the covering over the wiring is a little frayed, and you can start seeing the wires below it. So I want to make sure that because that's close to the ground, that some person doesn't walk up, maybe kids playing hide and go seek or something, and grabs that and can hurt themselves with the covering starting to come off. Plus, as you can see, looks like some of the caulking or sealing around where the wire enters isn't quite there anymore, and water does, rainwater does drip down that and go inside the house. And I have found moisture issues inside the panel because that water just runs along the top there, and that the panel's right on the other side of the wall. It's easy for water to get in. So that bottom picture's weatherheads are pretty big too, where a weatherhead's designed to keep water off of the main service line as it enters your house. This particular one just had a connection, as you can see, it's just sticking out, and with electrical tape covering it, where a weatherhead, you want to, it points it down, and there's a drip loop there, so the water drips off the loop before it hits the service wire and goes inside the house. And then, as I was mentioning before, that Federal Pacific panel, anytime you see that kind of panel, you just immediately replace it. You just get an electrician in there and replace it. And, there's not too many that I run across, but every once in a while you do run across them.
What fireplace issues are considered red flag?
A lot of the red flag and big ticket items with fireplaces and chimneys is again letting water into the system. And I don't have a picture on there, but as you can see, that top under the inspection photos, that top right hand figure 6 doesn't have a rain cap, and you can see some of the cracks in the concrete chimney crown. That could let water into the system, and what happens, especially in our area, you get the freeze-thaw cycles going, and then water gets in there, freezes and expands and cracks. Not only the crown, but some of the bricks end up cracking, and chimney repairs can be a costly item, especially if they're up and down the whole side of the house. Now this particular one's kind of closer to the roof, so rebuilding a chimney from the roof up isn't quite as expensive, but it's still not a cheap issue. So anytime I see a rain cap that's not on or any cracks in the crown, I always recommend repair of caulking or replacing.
What about asbestos?
Asbestos is always a hot topic, and asbestos is one of those things that it's not necessarily a, stay away from all cost type of thing. Asbestos can be found around, in this particular picture is around a vent, and of course back in the older days asbestos is a great fire retardant and insulation type of material, and they put it in a lot of things. But of course, as you found out later on, that when it gets disturbed and the fibers become airborne, they could definitely be a health issue. So whenever you run across it, it's not a, oh my goodness, stay away from it at all costs, but it's just something that you got to mitigate and cover and protect. So removal actually isn't a preferred way to mitigate the asbestos. It's more of a just make sure it gets covered and sealed and keep an eye on. Main thing I run across for is the 9-inch by 9-inch floor tiles, which contain, or has been known to contain asbestos, and even testing it isn't advised, because the best thing to do with those, since they're pretty sturdy still, is just to cover them with carpet or some kind of material to keep them from breaking and protect them. And then with venting, you put a kind of a plastic paint on there that helps seal it, and because nobody really hangs on any kind of vents to where it can crack and make the fibers airborne. The main mitigation is just to protect them.
Lead paint.
Yeah, lead paint, that's always another hot topic, and with lead paint, we kind of factually known it's in all older homes prior to, I believe it's 1975, and that pretty much all paint back in those times and before contained some amounts of lead. So testing is not recommended with lead paint, especially if you know it's an older home and it looks like a lot of the original paint's there. And the other thing with testing lead paint is you can test all you want in a room, and you might just miss the one spot that actually has lead paint on it. So it's almost an impossibility to test the whole house for lead paint without removing every single bit of paint and testing it, and then you got a cost factor. The mitigation of lead paint is pretty simple. You just got to make sure that it's covered with newer paint, that there isn't any chipping or peeling, and no friction surfaces. So basically with lead paint, you just got to make sure you do the right thing and cover, make sure that the potential lead paint is covered and sealed. And then if there's any kind of like on some old window frames type of thing, if the windows aren't working condition, the best thing to do is just replace the window frames with newer vinyl window frames. So it's just one of those things that you just got to make sure you know what you're doing with it and make sure you mitigate it. And then of course disclosure is a big thing with lead paint too. Is you gotta, when you know it's in the house, you just have to disclose it, and it's basically a disclosure for the life of the property as long as it exists.
More red flags on the older homes.
Again, this one talks about the roofs flashing and boots around plumbing vents and any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Any kind of a stack that's on the roof is you got to make sure that the flashing is okay. A lot of the older homes have like cast iron vent pipes, and those are always hard to get boots around, and you find a lot of people will just put a tar, a roofing tar around it, which will work for a while, but there's actually a little bit more maintenance to kind of get up there and check it and make sure that it doesn't crack, or because that tar will last for a while, but once it starts drying out, it cracks pretty easily. So caulking is really silicone caulking is really preferred method of making sure everything's caulked properly. So with just the older homes, of course, you got some chimneys, some older brick chimneys that may have started to deteriorate because of the water getting into the system and freeze-thaw. So whenever they install a new roof, you just got to make sure that the flashing that they put around the chimney is sufficient and it's sealed properly. Of course, you get some gutter issues that you got to kind of look at too to make sure that the gutters are the right size for the house. You don't want a smaller gutter for a large house where it becomes overwhelmed during a heavy rain, and that it's fixed properly and that there's no holes in the gutter, and allowing because you want the water to go down the drain system properly.
Ooh, foundations.
Yeah, and here again we talked about some of the issues on the right-hand side. You can see kind of a stone foundation where it's not really a red flag. Just when you typically buy a house with a stone foundation, you just got to expect every once in a while that some moisture is going to get in. And the big thing there is just don't ever store anything down there that could get wet or anything right up against the wall where you can get mold issues or anything like that. Now, the other ones those are some typical cracks that you find in the foundation, and it's not necessarily a cause for concern. You can do steps to mitigate any kind of moisture issues like caulking. These particular ones, I would recommend caulking those just with some silicone caulking and just keeping an eye on it. And the big thing you want to do is just kind of monitor it from the inside of the house if you can, and make sure every so often that that water isn't getting through or the crack isn't getting bigger.
And just out of curiosity, if you're purchasing a property that has supposedly been renovated, do you find situations where it might just be temporarily fixed but not really fixed, just kind of a lipstick fix-up?
Yeah, I mean, you could see like that last slide, somebody could just put regular caulking in those cracks, and that's kind of a lipstick issue. However, in those particular ones, it may not be too much of an issue. It kind of depends on what goes on the inside. So go to the next slide.
Okay.
And those two kind of middle pictures at top, one at 12 o'clock and the one at 6 o'clock, now those are acceptable repairs. The top one is those little knobs sticking out are injection, where they put a plastic tube, and it pushes the material that you're caulking the crack with way inside, and so it pretty much they fill it from the inside and the outside, and it's actually can be stronger than the actual concrete. So those if you see those in a house, and you know that there's probably been some moisture in the past, but those look like acceptable repairs. And that bottom one's kind of the same thing. I'm not sure if that was an injection repair or not, but you could definitely tell it's been repaired. And if you could see, usually vertical cracks like that are very typical. It's when you come across the horizontal cracks, which I believe may be on the next slide, is where you get some more of the issues. You have that one there with that level. That's actually a house I did where everything kind of looked normal, but the more I looked, the more I noticed that, hey, that's a vertical crack, and then I put the level up there, and sure enough, it's hard to see from that area, but the bottom is pretty much flush with the wall, and then top there's a little bit of a gap, and you can see that there's definitely been some vertical water pressure or forces pushing on that wall that is giving you a horizontal crack. And I'm not sure if this is the same house or not, but that top one, as you can see where I drew that red arrow from the brick to the door, you can see the distance growing as you go up. So I know that is the same house, because that crawl space block foundation was below that porch there, and since that wall was kind of bending in, it actually, you could see issues that you look from the outside and above ground, that you could see that there's definitely been some settlement, and that wall is basically the cause of that crack, or that door, that sliding glass door not being straight anymore, and it got jammed the door wasn't sliding as it should because it wasn't a true 90-degree angle anymore. But then you also look for other issues like there's cracks in the bricks. Usually you can get some cracks and some step cracking in the mortar, and that's just some typical settlement. But when you see them kind of going through bricks like that, you kind of look for more issues, foundation issues, and make sure everything's still in good shape inside. And that top left corner one, that's more of some termite damage that we look for in basements too.
Okay. Because it could be either termite or water damage or expansion of or too dry ground that really affect the foundations generally, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then we talk a little bit more about termites, not this slide, but the next one. But this one talks about crawl spaces, and crawl spaces we run, especially in older houses. Back in the days, they just built a crawl space and then let it go. But nowadays, we know that you want to make sure that all the debris is removed and that there should be a moisture barrier to keep the humidity level underneath in the crawl space to a minimum, because that's where the moisture comes from, is from the ground. So you want to make sure that there's a good moisture vapor in there, and also insulation either along the walls or on the bottom of the floor. If it's a living area above, will help with the cold and the heat in the summer and the winter, and help make your house a little more efficient. So we look for that as well.